Isabel Whitmore, stop pretending to be pitiful. Sebastian Cross's voice cut through the darkness of the penthouse like a blade of ice. He sat on the leather sofa, legs crossed, watching her the way a predator watches wounded prey. Is this what you wanted? His words dripped with venom. Using your parents' coma to force me to keep you here. A servant in the Cross household. At my beck and call. Isabel bit her lip until she tasted blood, forcing back the tears that threatened to fall. 2 years ago, she had been the heiress of Whitmore Holdings, pampered, adored, untouchable. Now she knelt on cold marble at the feet of the man who once swore to love her forever. Your parents deserved what happened to them. Sebastian rose from the sofa, each step toward her deliberate, menacing. Have you forgotten, Isabel? Your parents sold out the Cross Empire. They drove my father to his death, a heart attack from the betrayal. But they're in a coma. Her voice trembled. They had a car accident. They're barely alive. What more do you want? The debts of the parents fall to the children. He crouched before her, his fingers gripping her chin, forcing her face upward to meet his cold gaze. I'll give you 2 choices. His voice was barely a whisper. 1, you tell my brother Tristan yourself that your parents betrayed the Cross family. Confess their sins publicly. He paused, a cruel smile twisting his lips. Or 2, I take Tristan's life. The Cross Empire nearly collapsed anyway. My father already died of a heart attack. 1 more death won't make a difference. They're lying in hospital beds. Isabel choked on her words. How can you humiliate them like this? It's easier to blame people who can't defend themselves. Sebastian released her chin and straightened. I want Veronica to be at peace. You really love Veronica Harrington that much? His eyes darkened. It seems I need to help my fiancé eliminate her rival. What are you going to do? What am I going to do? He threw a maid's uniform at her feet. Strip, piece by piece. Now. Isabel closed her eyes. Tears streamed down her face. Sebastian, you'll never know what I sacrificed for you. Enough with the act, Isabel. His voice was full of contempt. Your tears only disgust me. Then be disgusted, Mr. Cross. She lifted her head, one last spark of pride flashing in her eyes. Let me go. Don't ever let me see you again. Keep dreaming, Isabel. He pulled her to her feet, his lips brushing against her ear as he whispered, As long as your parents are alive, you'll stay here to atone for their sins. But don't forget, he gestured toward the white gown hanging on the wall. Today is my engagement party. What secrets is Isabel hiding? Will Sebastian discover the truth before it's too late? Stay tuned. If this story hooked you, smash that like button and share it with someone who loves drama. Subscribe now. You won't want to miss what happens next. The grand lobby of the Plaza Hotel glittered beneath crystal chandeliers, where hundreds of New York's upper crust gathered for the most extravagant engagement celebration of the year. Isabel entered through the service door, and the tight black and white maid's uniform clung to her like a cruel reminder of what she'd become. 2 years earlier, she'd walked into this very room as Miss Whitmore, greeted with smiles and deference. Now she kept her head lowered as she slipped through the crowd with a tray of champagne, trying to make herself invisible. But the eyes of high society didn't miss her. The whispers spread across the lobby like an undercurrent. A well-dressed woman tilted her head and murmured to her companion, Do you see her? That's Isabel Whitmore, the daughter of the traitor who betrayed the Cross family. The other woman covered her mouth as she let out a sharp, amused scoff. I heard she used to be Sebastian's girlfriend, and now she's a servant in his own house. How pathetic. Isabel swallowed the humiliation and kept moving. She'd learned to ignore the gossip, the contempt in their stares. The only thing that kept her upright was the image of her parents lying motionless in their hospital beds. She had to live. She had to endure. For them. Then, all at once, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Veronica Harrington appeared in a dazzling white gown, diamonds blazing at her throat, the radiant smile of a victor on her lips. She walked beside Sebastian, her hand threaded through his, and she deliberately guided him past the spot where Isabel stood. Oh, Isabel. Veronica stopped, her voice syrupy with false sweetness. I didn't know you were here too. Isabel lowered her head with the practiced manners of a servant. Miss Harrington, Veronica giggled, turning to Sebastian. See? She's so much more obedient than she used to be. Sebastian said nothing. His gaze slid over Isabel as if she were an object without breath or feeling. That indifference hurt more than hatred ever could. Veronica's expression suddenly pinched as she looked down at her high heels. Oh no, I just stepped on something filthy. She lifted her eyes to Isabel, a vicious smile blooming on her mouth. Clean it. The crowd fell silent. Hundreds of eyes fixed on them. Isabel froze, the tray trembling in her hands. "Didn't you hear me?" Veronica raised her voice, making sure everyone could hear every word. "Get down and clean my shoes. Right now." The air thickened with silence. Isabel could feel every guest's gaze drilling into her. But she didn't kneel. She set the tray on the nearest table, straightened her spine, and looked Veronica directly in the eyes. "I'm a servant, not a slave." Veronica went still, as though she couldn't believe what she'd heard. Then her face flushed hot with anger. No one had ever dared speak back to her like this in front of a crowd. "How dare you!" A slap cracked through the lobby. Isabel staggered, her cheek burning, but she didn't fall. She stayed on her feet, lifting her chin. "You don't have the right to hit me." The crowd let out a gasp. Veronica clenched her jaw. "Have you forgotten who you are? A lowly maid, daring to talk back to me?" Isabel didn't yield an inch. "No matter who I am, you don't have the right to hit someone." The whispers returned, rippling through the room. People looked at Isabel differently now, surprised, and some even nodded with quiet approval at her courage. Veronica panicked as she felt the moment turning against her. She turned to Sebastian with tears shining in her eyes. "Sebastian, she's being disrespectful to me. You have to punish her." Sebastian moved forward in silence. Isabel's heart hammered. For one moment, just one brief moment, she hoped. She hoped that the Sebastian from 3 years ago, the man who'd sworn he'd protect her for the rest of his life, still existed somewhere inside him. "Sebastian," she whispered. He stopped in front of her. His eyes were ice. "Kneel, Isabel." The hope inside her shattered. "Sebastian, I didn't do anything wrong. I said kneel." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the full threat of a boss who was used to giving orders. Isabel didn't move. She met his gaze, searching for something, anything that might prove he still cared, but she found only endless cold. Sebastian placed a hand on her shoulder. Isabel thought he was going to say something, but he didn't. He pressed down, hard. Her knees hit the marble floor, bitterly cold, in front of hundreds of New York's most elite guests. Tears streamed down her face, but she made no sound. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of watching her break. Veronica smiled in triumph, her eyes gleaming with pleasure as she looked down at Isabel kneeling at her feet. "You see? This is where you belong," the crowd whispered, some shaking their heads in pity, others laughing under their breath. Isabel bowed her head, her hair falling like a curtain to hide her face, hiding the pain that was tearing her apart from the inside. Then the doors of the lobby swung open. Every head turned. Margaret Cross entered, carrying the commanding presence of the most powerful woman in the Cross family. She stopped, her gaze sweeping over the scene. Isabel on her knees, Sebastian standing beside her, cold and unmoved, Veronica smiling like a victor. No one could read what Margaret was thinking. Her eyes were sharp, unreadable. She looked at Isabel for a long moment, then turned her gaze to Sebastian. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't speak. She simply stood there, watching in silence, like a judge weighing everyone in her mind. The engagement party ended, but Isabel's hell didn't. She'd barely stepped into the back corridor to leave when a hand clamped around her wrist and yanked her into a nearby private room. The door slammed shut. Veronica stood in front of her, her eyes blazing. "Who do you think you are? Humiliating me in front of all those people." Isabel tried to wrench her hand free. "I didn't do anything to you. Please let me go." But Veronica didn't. Her gaze dropped to Isabel's wrist, where a platinum bracelet gleamed under the light. Veronica's face changed. "What is that?" She jerked Isabel's arm up and stared hard at the bracelet. This is a Cross family heirloom." Isabel went silent, instinctively pulling her wrist behind her back. But it was too late. Veronica had seen it clearly. "This bracelet is only passed down to a Cross daughter-in-law." "Where did you get it? You stole it, didn't you?" "I didn't steal it," Isabel said, her voice steady but unyielding. "Margaret gave it to me." Veronica let out a cold laugh, thick with contempt. "She gave it to you? Don't lie to me. That bracelet should have been mine. I'm Sebastian's fiancé." She lunged, trying to rip the bracelet from Isabel's wrist. They struggled, Isabel fighting to hold her ground, but Veronica moved like someone unhinged, her nails raking Isabel's skin and leaving red marks behind. "Let go. You don't deserve to wear it. You're just a servant, the daughter of a traitor." "It's mine!" Isabel shouted, losing her composure for the first time. "Margaret gave it to me. You've got no right to take it." At that moment, the door opened. Sebastian stood in the doorway, his cold gaze taking in the chaos. Veronica's expression transformed instantly. Tears filled her eyes as she ran to him. Sebastian! She stole the Cross family heirloom, the platinum bracelet your grandmother left behind. Sebastian looked at Isabel, then down at her wrist, where the bracelet still sat. His eyes darkened. Take it off. 2 short words, cold as ice. Veronica smiled in triumph, turning to Isabel with open relish. Isabel felt as if someone had driven a knife straight into her heart. Even this bracelet, the only keepsake that had given her a shred of hope, was about to be taken from her. She lowered her head, her trembling fingers touching the bracelet, ready to remove it. Stop! A commanding voice rang out from the doorway. Margaret Cross entered, poised and regal, her sharp eyes sweeping over everyone in the room. Mother, Sebastian said quietly. Margaret didn't look at her son. She walked straight to Isabel, gently took her wrist, and examined the bracelet. I'm the one who gave her that bracelet, she said, calm but impossible to contradict. Once a gift is given, it isn't taken back. Veronica froze. But Mother, it's a Cross family heirloom. How can you give it to her? She's only a servant, the daughter of a traitor. Margaret turned to Veronica, her gaze as cold as water. This is Cross family business. Who I give it to is my decision. Veronica looked to Sebastian, waiting for him to defend her, but Sebastian stayed silent. He didn't dare oppose his mother. He only stood there, his expression unreadable. Sebastian, Veronica screamed. You're really going to let her favor that woman like this? Sebastian still didn't speak. Veronica ground her teeth, tears of fury spilling down her cheeks. Fine, just fine. You always favor her. Always. She spun and ran out of the room, her heels striking the corridor in sharp, echoing bursts. Sebastian looked at his mother for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. The room held only 2 people now. Margaret turned to Isabel, and her expression softened, so different from the chill she'd shown Veronica. Are you hurt? Isabel shook her head, tears gathering fast. I don't understand. Why are you so good to me? Everyone says my parents are traitors. Everyone hates me. Margaret sighed and gently smoothed Isabel's hair. The sins of the previous generation shouldn't be carried by the next. She paused, her hand still light at Isabel's temple. Keep the bracelet. It belongs to you. But why? Isabel cried, her voice breaking. Why do you trust me? Margaret didn't answer. She only gave Isabel a mysterious smile, patted her shoulder, and walked out. Isabel stood alone in the empty room, staring at the bracelet on her wrist as tears fell onto the shining platinum. Out in the corridor, Margaret stopped and took out her phone. She looked around to make sure no one was there, then dialed. I need to see you right away, she said, her voice dropping, heavy with urgency. There's something very important we have to reinvestigate. I think we missed something. It was late at night when Isabel returned to the penthouse at the top of Cross Tower. She'd barely stepped inside the apartment when the door behind her opened. Sebastian stumbled in, and the sharp stench of alcohol hit her at once. He'd been drinking heavily after the party, his eyes bloodshot, his steps unsteady. Isabel meant to slip quietly back to her room, but Sebastian had already seen her. He came toward her, seized her wrist, and yanked her toward the bedroom. Isabel didn't fight. She knew it was useless. She let him pull her along like a lifeless puppet. Sebastian shoved her down onto the edge of the bed, then reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small white pill. He tossed it into her lap. Take it. Isabel looked at the pill, then lifted her eyes to him. What is it? Sebastian gave a cold laugh, a smile that never reached his eyes. Birth control. You're not worthy of carrying my child. The words struck Isabel like a knife straight through the heart. She stared at the pill in her hand, small and pure white, yet heavy with an enormous humiliation. Her fingers trembled, tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't say a word. She'd cried too much already. Tears changed nothing. They didn't soften the man standing in front of her. Isabel raised the pill to her lips and swallowed it in front of him. Her throat burned with bitterness, and she couldn't tell whether it came from the pill or the pain. Sebastian stood there, watching her swallow. His expression was complicated, something beyond hatred flickering in his gaze. Something passed through those dark eyes, and it vanished too quickly for Isabel to name it. Go to sleep, he said, then turned and walked out. Isabel lay down, faced the wall, and closed her eyes. She tried to sleep, but she couldn't. The ache inside her was too large. She didn't know how much time had passed when she heard the bedroom door open. Familiar footsteps moved closer to the bed. Isabel kept her breathing slow and even, pretending she was deeply asleep. Sebastian sat down on the edge of the mattress, right beside her. He sat there for a long time, saying nothing. Isabel could feel his eyes on her in the dark. Then a trembling hand touched her cheek, gently, tenderly. Nothing like the cruelty of daylight. "Why, Belle?" Sebastian whispered into the night, his voice raw and full of pain. "Why did you betray me?" Isabel bit down hard on her lip, so she wouldn't sob out loud. His fingers stroked her cheek, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I hate you," he whispered, his voice thick. "I hate you for betraying me. I hate you for destroying my family." He paused for a long time. "But why can't I forget you? Why does my chest hurt like someone's crushing it whenever I see you suffering?" A drop fell onto Isabel's cheek. It wasn't her tear, it was his. Sebastian Cross, the cold, ruthless Mafia boss, was crying in the darkness. 3 years ago, you promised you'd stay with me forever," he murmured, like a sigh. "You said you loved me. You said nothing could ever separate us. And then you—" He didn't finish. His hand left her face. His footsteps moved away. The door closed. Isabel stayed perfectly still, her eyes squeezed shut. Tears soaked her pillow. She'd heard everything, every word, every breath, every tear he let fall. "You'll never know what I sacrificed for you," she thought, "and I can't tell you. If I do, you'll die." Isabel opened her eyes in the dark and stared at the ceiling. Her gaze was filled with pain, but it held something else too. A secret she was keeping. A truth she couldn't reveal to anyone. She curled her fingers tight around the platinum bracelet on her wrist, the only thing she had left from the old days of happiness. And she knew, no matter how much suffering she had to endure, she still wouldn't speak, because she loved him, no matter how much he hated her. 3 weeks had passed since that night. Isabel had grown used to her new life at Cross Estate on Long Island. Every day she woke at 5 o'clock, while the sky still hadn't fully brightened, and began her work by preparing breakfast for the entire family. After that came the cleaning of 47 rooms in this enormous mansion. Mopping floors, vacuuming, changing bed linens, wiping glass until it shone, then the laundry, the ironing, the preparation of lunch and dinner, setting the table and serving whenever Sebastian arrived or when guests were present. She was allowed to rest only when the clock struck midnight, and even then, it was only a few short hours before a new day began again. Her hands, once soft and carefully tended, were now rough and cracked from bleach and relentless labor. Fingers that had once worn diamond rings were now reddened by cold whenever she had to wash clothes in icy water at dawn. But Isabel didn't complain once. She worked in silence, head lowered, enduring every contemptuous stare from the other servants, who treated her like a joke. The former Whitmore heiress was now beneath even them. Once a month, on her only day off, Isabel spent every dollar of her meager wages to visit her parents at a private hospital in Manhattan. Today was the same. She sat beside the bed where her mother and father lay unmoving, wires and machines surrounding them. The steady beep of the heart monitor echoed through the quiet room. Isabel held her mother's cold hand, and tears slipped down her cheeks without a sound. "Mom, I miss you," she whispered. "I miss Dad. I miss the days when we were happy together." She turned to her father, whose face looked more hollow than the last time she'd come. "I know you didn't do it. I know you didn't betray the Cross family. You taught me to live with honesty and honor. You'd never do something like that." She tightened her grip on her mother's hand. "I'll prove you're innocent. No matter how long it takes. No matter how much I have to endure. I promise you both." Isabel stayed at their bedside until nightfall, then left in silence. She returned to Cross Estate when it was already late. The moment she stepped through the servants' entrance, she stopped short. A figure was waiting in the darkness. "Isabel," Tristan Cross said. He stepped forward, his youthful face tight with worry. Sebastian's younger brother, the one she'd once regarded as her own little brother in the old, happy years. "Tristan, what are you doing here?" Tristan glanced around to make sure no one was nearby, then handed her a thick envelope. "Take this, for your parents' hospital bills." Isabel looked at the envelope, then pushed it back toward him. "I don't need your pity." "This isn't pity," Tristan said, his voice firm as he pressed the envelope into her hand. "I believe you're innocent." Isabel went still, staring at him as though she'd misheard. In the past 2 years, this was the first time anyone besides Margaret had said they believed her. "Why do you believe me? Everyone says my parents are traitors." Tristan met her eyes. Because I know you. Do you remember my car accident 3 years ago? I almost died. You were the one who donated blood for me, the one who sat by my hospital bed and took care of me for 2 full weeks, even though you and Sebastian had only been dating a few months. He paused, his voice turning unmistakably certain. Someone willing to sacrifice like that for another person can't be a traitor. You're not that kind of person. And I don't believe your parents are either. Tears surged into Isabel's eyes. She hadn't expected anyone to still believe in her. Tristan. My brother Sebastian is being deceived, Tristan said, his gaze hard with resolve. I don't know by whom, but I'll find the truth. Wait for me. I'll prove you're innocent. Isabel couldn't speak. She only nodded, tears streaming down her face. Tristan patted her shoulder lightly, then turned and walked away. Neither of them knew that behind a nearby door, Veronica stood in the shadows, listening to every word. Her face shifted, from surprise to anger, then to fear. Her hand tightened around her phone, fingers trembling as she dialed. Dad, we've got trouble. Raymond Harrington's office sat on the top floor of the Harrington Court building, overlooking the whole of Manhattan at night. He lounged in an expensive leather chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching the city's glittering lights beyond the window with a satisfied smile. The phone on his desk vibrated. He glanced at the screen, saw Veronica's name, and picked up. Dad, we've got trouble. Veronica's panicked voice burst through the line. Tristan's helping Isabel. He said he believes she's innocent. He said he'll find the truth. Raymond took a slow sip of whiskey, showing not a trace of worry. Don't worry, I'll handle it. You just keep watching and report back to me. He ended the call, then dialed his private attorney. 10 minutes later, a middle-aged man in a black suit stepped into the office. Raymond gestured for him to sit, then poured another glass of whiskey. How's it going? The attorney opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. Everything's going perfectly, sir. Sebastian Cross still firmly believes Edward Whitmore's the traitor. No one suspects a thing. Raymond smiled with quiet satisfaction and leaned back. He remembered 2 years earlier, when he'd sold every scrap of confidential information from the Cross Empire to a rival for $50 million. He'd forged the electronic evidence flawlessly, so every trail led straight to Edward Whitmore, the man who'd been his closest friend for 20 years. Stupid Edward Whitmore, Raymond sneered. He still thought of me as a good friend right up to the end. When I visited him in the hospital after the accident, he even held my hand and asked me to take care of Isabel. He set his whiskey down, his gaze turning cold. That car accident for the Whitmores was arranged by me, too. They were about to uncover the truth, so I had to silence them. It's a shame they didn't die, but a coma like this works just as well. No one can hear what they've got to say. The attorney nodded, long accustomed to his boss's cruelty. And what about Miss Veronica's marriage to Sebastian Cross? Raymond rose and walked to the window, staring out at the city. That's the real endgame. Once Veronica marries Sebastian, I'll slowly take over the Cross Empire from the inside. I've waited 20 years, and now I'm finally about to swallow Richard Cross's empire whole. He turned back, a vicious smile spreading across his lips. Richard, you're dead, and your family's still going to serve me. Your son's about to marry my daughter. Your enemy's daughter is on her knees as a servant in your own house. Isn't that deliciously ironic? The attorney cleared his throat. But sir, what if Tristan Cross really investigates? He's a smart one. Raymond waved a hand. I've got a plan B. If that little Isabel keeps causing trouble, I'll frame her for theft. One of Veronica's expensive pieces of jewelry, for example. Get her thrown out of the Cross house. Cut off every connection to that family. He laughed softly, without warmth. With no one protecting her, she won't be able to do a thing. Her parents are in the hospital. No money, no power. She'll end up on the streets like a beggar, and then no one's going to believe a beggar's words. The attorney nodded, stood, and prepared to leave. I'll arrange everything, sir. Raymond flicked his hand, dismissing him. When the door closed, he turned back to the window, gazing into the night with eyes full of ambition. He didn't know that down below the building, in the darkness of a narrow alley, a black car sat parked in silence. Inside, a man held a camera with a telephoto lens, taking photo after photo through Raymond's office window. This private investigator had been tailing Raymond for 2 weeks under Margaret Cross's orders, and tonight, he'd just captured the secret meeting between Raymond and his private attorney. He lifted his phone and called the woman who'd hired him. Mrs. Cross, I've got new information. I think you're going to want to hear this. That evening, Isabel was assigned to clean the library at Cross Estate. It was a vast room, shelves rising all the way to the ceiling, the faint scent of old paper and oak lingering in the air. She was dusting the shelves when she heard footsteps, and a familiar voice through a door left slightly ajar. Margaret Cross entered the small study adjoining the library, unaware that Isabel was in there. Isabel meant to speak up and announce herself, but Margaret had already lifted her phone and begun to talk. "What did you find?" Margaret's voice was grave. Isabel went utterly still, not daring to move. "The records show the traitorous transaction originated from an IP address at Harrington Corp., not Whitmore Holdings." A man's voice came through the phone on speaker. Isabel's heart seemed to stop. She held her breath, straining to hear every word. "I retraced the entire set of transactions. Someone was very skilled at wiping the trail and framing Edward Whitmore. But they weren't perfect. There are still gaps." Margaret drew a deep breath. "Anything else?" "The Whitmore's car crash also shows signs of sabotage. I rechecked the police report and the mechanic's findings. The brake line was cut. This wasn't an accident, ma'am. This was an attempted murder." Isabel clapped a hand over her mouth, fighting back a sob. Her knees weakened, and her hand brushed a stack of books on the shelf. They tumbled to the floor with a loud crash. The call fell silent. Footsteps moved closer. Margaret Cross appeared in the doorway and saw Isabel trembling amid the scattered books. "I know you were listening," she said, her voice not angry at all. "It's all right." Isabel lifted her head, tears pouring down her face. "Mrs. Cross, what I just heard, is it true?" Margaret came over, helped her up, and guided her to sit on the sofa nearby. "I didn't believe your parents did it either. From the beginning, too many things didn't add up. Edward was my husband's friend for more than 30 years. I know what kind of man he is." She sat beside Isabel and took her hand. "I'm reinvestigating everything. But you must keep this absolutely secret. Don't tell anyone, not even Sebastian." Isabel broke into sobs, 2 years of injustice spilling out at once. "I've always known my parents were innocent. I knew they'd never do something like that, but no one believed me. No one would even listen." Margaret pulled her into her arms and soothed her like a mother would. "I believe you. Be patient. The truth will come to light. I promise you." Isabel cried against her, feeling warmth and protection she'd been missing for 2 long years. When Isabel had steadied herself, Margaret stood and walked to the window, gazing into the darkness outside with a pensive look. "But I'm worried, Isabel. Someone's watching me." Isabel lifted her head and wiped her tears. "Watching you?" Margaret nodded, her eyes still on the night beyond the glass. "Yesterday there was an unfamiliar car parked outside all day. Today my phone made strange noises, like someone was listening in. I think someone knows I'm investigating." A chill ran through Isabel. "An enemy? Who do you think is behind all of this?" Margaret turned back, her gaze sharp, yet threaded with worry. "I'm not certain yet. The evidence is starting to surface, but I need more time to confirm." She paused, her voice dropping. "But I suspect someone very close to us. Very close." Isabel felt ice crawl up her spine. "What should I do now?" "You need to be careful," Margaret said, gripping Isabel's shoulders and looking straight into her eyes. "If the enemy learns I'm investigating, they'll act. You can't let anything slip. Keep living as you always have. Do your work. Don't give anyone reason to suspect." Isabel nodded, forcing her fear down. "I understand. I'll be careful." Margaret smiled and smoothed Isabel's hair. "You're a good girl. I'll protect you. I promise." She turned and left, leaving Isabel alone in the library with 1,000 thoughts twisting through her mind. Out in the hallway, Sebastian leaned against the wall, his face gone pale. He'd come to find his mother, and accidentally overheard part of the conversation. An IP address at Harrington Corp., a sabotaged car crash. His mother was reinvestigating. His mother believed Isabel was innocent. For the first time in 2 years, Sebastian's certainty began to crack. For the first time, he wondered if he'd been wrong. 1 week after that night, the Metropolitan Museum held its annual charity gala, drawing in all of New York's upper crust. Raymond Harrington had received word from his private source that Margaret Cross was hiring a detective to investigate him. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. He had to move before everything slipped beyond his control. Isabel was ordered to serve at the gala alongside the other Cross household staff. She wore the familiar black and white uniform, slipping through the crowd with a tray of champagne in her hands. The museum shimmered beneath crystal lights, paintings and sculptures worth millions of dollars displayed everywhere. Veronica Harrington appeared in a blazing red gown, a diamond necklace glittering against her chest. A $2 million piece Raymond had given his daughter the week before. She made her rounds through the grand hall, arm in arm with Sebastian, smiling brightly at the guests, but her eyes never stopped tracking Isabel. When Isabel passed a dimmer stretch near the restroom entrance, Veronica quickly separated from Sebastian, claiming she needed to fix her hair. She followed Isabel, waiting for the right moment. When Isabel stopped to set her tray down and fetch more glasses, Veronica drifted behind her like a ghost. Her hand moved fast, slipping the diamond necklace into Isabel's uniform pocket without Isabel noticing. Veronica returned to the hall wearing a secretive smile. 10 minutes later, just as the party reached its peak, Veronica suddenly screamed, "My necklace! My diamond necklace is gone!" The entire hall went silent. Every head turned toward her. Sebastian hurried to his fiancée's side. "Calm down. You were wearing it a moment ago." "I know, but it's not on my neck anymore." Veronica sobbed, tears running down her cheeks. "Someone stole it. Call security. Search everyone." The museum's security team appeared at once. They began checking people one by one. When it was Isabel's turn, a guard shoved his hand into her pocket and pulled out the glittering diamond necklace. "Found it!" he shouted. "In her pocket!" The hall erupted. Whispers and shouts crashed through the room. Veronica rushed forward and snatched the necklace from the guard's hand. "She stole it from me. Call the police. Arrest her." Isabel stood frozen, unable to believe what was happening. "I didn't do it. I didn't steal anything. Someone put it in my pocket." But no one listened. The crowd looked at her with disgust and contempt. A woman sneered. "A trader's daughter stealing is only natural. Blood doesn't lie." A man shook his head. "The Cross family's too kind to keep someone like this. They should have thrown her out long ago." Tears streamed down Isabel's face. She looked around for help and found only unfamiliar faces filled with malice. In a corner of the hall, Raymond Harrington watched, a satisfied smile spreading across his lips. The plan was unfolding perfectly. Sebastian appeared, pushing through the crowd until he stood in front of Isabel. He looked at her with an expression that was complicated. Disappointment threaded through it, and something else as well. "I'll handle this," he said to the crowd, his voice carrying that familiar cold authority. Isabel thought he was going to hand her over to the police. She'd steeled herself for the worst. But Sebastian didn't. He seized her wrist, dragged her through the crowd, and led her out of the hall through a side door. Veronica screamed after him. "Sebastian, where are you taking her? She has to be arrested." Sebastian didn't turn around. He pulled Isabel into an empty corridor, away from the crowd's eyes. Isabel broke down, sobbing. "I didn't do it. I swear I didn't steal anything. Someone set me up." Sebastian didn't answer. He only stood there, watching her with an unreadable gaze. Just then, Tristan ran up, his face flushed from rushing. "Brother," he panted, holding up his phone. "I've got video from the museum's security cameras. You need to see this." Sebastian took the phone and hit play. On the screen, Veronica followed Isabel in secret, then slipped the necklace into her pocket, clear as day. "The video shows Veronica putting the necklace into Isabel's pocket," Tristan said, his voice grave. "She framed her, brother." Sebastian went rigid, as if struck by lightning, his face drained of color, his hand crushing the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked at Isabel crying in front of him, then back toward the grand hall where Veronica was playing the victim. His world was breaking apart, piece by piece. Everything he'd believed for the past 2 years suddenly shook at its very foundation. That night, Sebastian sat alone in his office at the top of Cross Tower, the glow of his computer screen washing over his ashen face. He played the video Tristan had given him again and again, and every time he watched it, it felt as though someone was crushing his heart in their fist. Veronica's furtive hand, slipping the necklace into Isabel's pocket, was captured with merciless clarity, sharp down to the smallest detail. It couldn't be denied. It couldn't be explained away. He'd trusted the wrong person. He picked up his phone and called Veronica. "Come to my office. Now." 20 minutes later, Veronica walked in, her makeup flawless, a confident smile on her lips. "Why did you call me?" "It's so late." Sebastian didn't speak. He only turned the computer screen toward her and hit play. The smile on Veronica's mouth froze as she watched herself on that footage. "Explain," Sebastian said, his voice cold as ice. "What is this?" Veronica burst into tears at once and rushed forward, dropping to her knees at his feet. "Sebastian, that video is fake. Isabel set me up. She staged everything to frame me. Sebastian looked down at her, and there was no tenderness left in his eyes. Staged? Security footage from the museum is staged? I'm being framed, Veronica sobbed, tears spilling down her cheeks. You have to believe me. I love you. I'd never do something like that. Sebastian fell silent for a long moment, then stood and walked to the window. Get out. I need to think. But Sebastian. Get out. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a threat that made the air feel sharp. Veronica knew she couldn't plead any longer. She stood, wiped her tears, and walked out. But before she closed the door, she turned back and looked at Sebastian with pure hatred in her eyes. She wasn't going to let this go. As soon as Veronica left, Tristan entered, carrying a thick stack of documents. Brother, I found more evidence. Sebastian turned to him. What evidence? Tristan set the documents on the desk and flipped through page after page. I traced unusual financial transactions around the time of the betrayal 2 years ago. $50 million was transferred from an anonymous account to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. He stopped and looked Sebastian straight in the eye. That company is owned by Raymond Harrington. Sebastian felt as if someone had slammed a fist into his stomach. Raymond Harrington? Veronica's father? Yes, Tristan said, his voice grave. The timing matches exactly when Cross Empire's information was sold to our competitor. He held Sebastian's gaze. Brother, I think we blamed the wrong man. Edward Whitmore didn't betray us. Raymond Harrington did. Sebastian sank back into his chair, his mind spinning. Everything he'd believed for 2 years was collapsing. He'd tormented Isabel, humiliated her, treated her like a criminal. But if she was innocent, unable to restrain himself, Sebastian got up and went to Isabel's room at Cross Estate. It was late. He pushed the door open without knocking. Isabel was curled on the bed, her eyes swollen from crying. She lifted her head when she saw him and quickly wiped her tears. What do you need? Sebastian stood over her, looking down at her thin, pale face. How much suffering had she endured over the past 2 years? Why didn't you defend yourself? He asked, his voice rough. Why didn't you fight back? Why did you stay silent and endure all of it? Isabel lifted her chin and met his eyes. Because no one believed me. Her voice was steady, but bitter to the bone. Not even you. Especially you. The words drove straight through Sebastian's heart like a blade. He stared into her brown eyes, eyes that had once looked at him with love, and now held only exhaustion and pain. Yet deep inside them, he still saw the old spark. Before he could stop himself, Sebastian raised his hand and touched her cheek. Isabel went still, barely daring to breathe. He pulled her to her feet, the space between them shrinking to only a few inches. He looked into her eyes, then down at her lips. He tilted his head, his mouth almost brushing hers, and then, suddenly, he stopped. No, he whispered, his voice torn. I can't. He pushed her away, turned, and walked out fast, leaving Isabel standing there alone with a shattered heart. Sebastian stepped into the elevator and the doors slid shut. He stood alone in the tight space, then suddenly drove his fist into the elevator wall, metal ringing out with a harsh, bright sound. If Belle's really innocent, he whispered, his voice breaking, then what have I done for the past 2 years? 2 weeks had passed since that night. Sebastian had ordered a private investigator to dig into everything about Raymond Harrington, and every transaction tied to the betrayal from 2 years ago. Today, in a secret meeting room in the Cross Tower penthouse, Sebastian, Margaret, and Tristan sat in silence, waiting for the final results. The private investigator walked in and set a thick stack of documents on the table. This is the complete report, he said. I've investigated for a full month, and I can confirm everything with solid, verifiable evidence. He opened the file and began to lay it out. Raymond Harrington is the true traitor. 2 years ago, he sold all of Cross Empire's confidential information to the rival corporation Blackwell Industries for $50 million. The money moved through a complex network of shell companies in the Cayman Islands. But I traced it all. Sebastian took the documents and began reading page after page. His hands trembled as he stared at proof that couldn't be denied. Raymond forged the electronic evidence with precision, so every trail led to Edward Whitmore. The investigator continued. He used advanced technology to alter IP addresses, falsify emails, and fabricate transaction records. Edward Whitmore is completely innocent. Margaret drew a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the arm of her chair. And the car crash involving the Whitmores? It wasn't an accident, ma'am. The investigator's voice stayed steady. I had the vehicle re-examined and found evidence the brake line was deliberately cut. Raymond hired someone to do it when Mr. Whitmore began to suspect and reinvestigate. He arranged the crash to silence the Whitmores before they uncovered the truth. Sebastian felt as if the air had been pulled from his lungs. What was his motive? The investigator looked at him, grave. Raymond's ultimate goal was to seize the Cross Empire from the inside. He'd been planning this for 20 years. By framing Whitmore and convincing the Cross family to believe it, he removed his greatest obstacle. Then he arranged for his adopted daughter, Veronica, to get close to you, Mr. Sebastian, and seduce you. Once the marriage took place, Raymond would slowly take control of the Cross Empire's power and assets through Veronica. Tristan slammed his fist on the table. Bastard! He fooled all of us. The investigator turned to the next page. There's one more thing. He looked at Sebastian with a trace of sympathy. Your father, Richard Cross, didn't die of a heart attack brought on by betrayal the way everyone believes. The shock of discovering the betrayal did trigger the heart attack, but in truth, Raymond Harrington is the one who indirectly killed him. Without Raymond's scheme, your father would still be alive. Sebastian let the documents drop onto the table, his whole body trembling. Everything he'd believed for 2 years had been a lie. Raymond Harrington had killed his father, destroyed the Whitmore family, and turned Sebastian's life into a play that Raymond himself directed. And Sebastian Cross, the most powerful mafia boss in New York, had become a puppet in the man's hands. 2 years replayed in his mind. Isabel on her knees in front of hundreds of guests at the engagement party. The pain in her eyes when he forced her to swallow the birth control pill. The tremor in her voice when he called her a traitor's daughter. Her face when Veronica slapped her and he didn't intervene. Her hands turned rough from 2 years of work as a servant. And her gaze that night, when she said no one believed her, least of all him. Sebastian sagged over the table, his shoulders shaking. For the first time in 2 years, tears slid down his face. The cold, ruthless mafia boss, the man who hadn't cried even at his father's funeral, was now sobbing like a child. What did I do to her? He whispered, his voice breaking. What did I do to Belle for 2 years? Margaret rose and came to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. You didn't know, Sebastian. All of us were deceived. Raymond is cunning and cruel. He fooled everyone. Sebastian lifted his head, eyes bloodshot. But I tortured her, Mom. I humiliated her, treated her like a criminal. I destroyed her life because of lies. Margaret gathered her son into her arms, for the first time in many years. Now you know the truth. The question is what you'll do next. Sebastian was silent for a long moment. Then he slowly stood, wiped his tears, and looked up. The pain was gone from his eyes. In its place was the cold ruthlessness of New York's most powerful mafia boss. Raymond Harrington, he said, his voice ice. I'm going to make him pay 1,000-fold for what he's done. He killed my father, ruined the Whitmores, and turned me into a tool in his scheme. I'll take everything back, bit by bit. He paused, his gaze softening only slightly. But first, I need to see Belle. At midnight that night. Sebastian stood outside Isabel's door at Cross Estate. The hallway was pitch dark, with only moonlight slipping through a window and laying a faint strip of light across the floor. He stood there a long time, his hand reaching for the doorknob, then pulling back. Once, twice, 3 times. He didn't know how to face her. He'd hurt her too deeply. The 2 years of hell she'd endured had come from him. How could he look her in the eyes and admit he'd been wrong? And yet he had to. He owed her, at the very least, the truth. At last, Sebastian drew a slow breath and pushed the door open. The small servant's room was dark, lit only by weak moonlight through the window. Isabel lay on the bed, black hair spilled across the pillow. She was crying in her sleep, tears sliding down her cheeks, her lips moving as she murmured someone's name he couldn't make out. Sebastian stepped to the bedside and sat on the edge of the mattress, studying her thin, pallid face. 2 years ago, she'd been a beautiful young woman, cheeks flushed with life, eyes bright with joy. Now her face was hollow, shadows under her eyes, the marks of sleepless nights and days of exhausting labor. He'd done this to her. He'd ruined her life. As if she sensed someone near, Isabel startled awake. Her eyes flew open, and when she saw Sebastian sitting by her bed, she jerked upright in panic and curled into the corner against the wall like a wounded animal. What do you want?" Her voice shook, her eyes wide with fear. Sebastian felt his heart clench as he saw that fear. She was afraid of him. The girl who'd once loved him with everything she had now feared him like a monster, and he'd earned that. Sebastian rose slowly, then did something he'd never done for anyone in his life. He knelt. The most powerful mafia boss in New York, the man who made the underworld tremble, dropped to his knees in front of a thin young woman in a cramped servant's room. "I know the truth now, Belle," he said, his voice rough. "Your parents are innocent. Raymond Harrington is the real traitor. He forged the evidence, framed your parents, and arranged the car crash to silence them." Isabel went still, as though her mind couldn't accept what she'd heard. What are you saying?" "I was wrong, Belle." Sebastian lifted his head and looked into her eyes, his own red rimmed. "I was completely wrong. You and your parents are innocent. And I'm sorry." Isabel stared at him, kneeling before her, hearing him say the words. 2 years. 2 years she'd waited for this moment. 2 years she'd hoped someone would believe her. But now that it had come, she didn't feel relief. She felt rage. The anger she'd carried for 2 years erupted like a volcano. Isabel shoved Sebastian back, sprang off the bed, and stood in front of him with fire in her eyes. "Sorry? You say you're sorry?" she screamed, her voice breaking with pain. "You made me kneel in front of hundreds of people. You pressed my shoulder down and forced me onto my knees like a dog." Sebastian didn't stand. He stayed on his knees, taking every word. "You forced me to take birth control. You threw it at me and said I wasn't worthy of carrying your child. You treated me like an animal." Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't stop. "You watched them hit me, humiliate me, and you didn't say a word. You stood there like stone while your fiancé slapped me across the face." Her throat tightened, her shoulders trembling. "My parents were in the hospital with no one to care for them. I had to work like a slave just to pay the bills. Every day I wanted to die. Every day I asked myself why I was still alive," she shouted, her voice splintering. 2 years of hell. You think one apology is enough?" Sebastian stayed kneeling, offering no defense, no explanation. Every sentence was a blade driven into his heart, and he deserved every blade. "You're right," he whispered, his voice thick. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm a monster. I destroyed your life. You can hit me, curse me. I deserve it all." Isabel stood there, chest heaving, tears pouring down. She'd spilled every ounce of pain she'd carried for 2 years, and still she didn't feel lighter. She only felt empty. Sebastian rose slowly and stepped toward her. He took her hand, gentle but firm. "But give me one chance, Belle," he said, meeting her eyes, his gaze fierce with resolve. "Not to make it up to you. I know I can't undo what I did, but to take revenge for you, for your parents, for everything you lost. Raymond Harrington will pay for every one of his crimes." The next morning, the living room at Cross Estate became the site of a secret meeting. Sebastian stood before the massive glass wall. Margaret and Tristan sat on the sofa, and Isabel stood in the corner with an unreadable expression. After last night, she wasn't crying anymore, but her eyes were still guarded as they settled on Sebastian. He began to lay out the plan. "Raymond Harrington has hidden his crimes for 2 years. He thinks he's safe, thinks no one knows the truth. That's his greatest weakness." Sebastian flipped through the pages of documents on the table. "We've got enough proof of illegal financial transfers, forged records, and conspiracy to commit murder. If we arrange it the right way, he'll have no way out." Margaret nodded. "I've contacted some of your father's old partners. They're willing to turn their backs on Harrington Corp once we show airtight proof," Tristan added. "I'm ready too. The media channels and the connections with the FBI are already in place. All we need is your word." Sebastian turned to Isabel. "Belle, you're our most important witness. You endured 2 years in this house. You know what Veronica and Raymond have done. Your testimony will be the fatal blow." Isabel was silent for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "I don't want to be involved." The room seemed to freeze. Margaret and Tristan stared at her as if they'd misheard. Sebastian went still. "Why? He destroyed your family. He almost killed your parents." Isabel met Sebastian's eyes. There was no fear in her now, no raw pain the way there had been before, only an endless exhaustion. "Because I don't want to become someone like you." Her words landed like a slap across Sebastian's face. "For 2 years, I've watched what cruelty can do to a person. I watched you destroy me without hesitation because you believed you were doing the right thing." She paused, her voice trembling just slightly. "I don't want to turn into that. I don't want to become someone ruled by hatred, willing to do anything for revenge. I'm afraid that if I step onto that path, I'll lose myself." Sebastian stayed silent for a long time. It hurt, but he couldn't argue, because she was right. He'd been a monster. He'd let hatred turn him ruthless, and she'd paid the highest price. "You're right," he said at last, his voice low. "I was a monster. I hurt the person I loved most because I believed lies." He moved closer, but he didn't touch her. "But Belle, this isn't revenge. This is justice. Raymond killed my father, nearly killed your parents, and ruined the lives of so many people. And if we don't stop him, he'll do it again to someone else." Sebastian held her gaze. "You can choose not to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. But don't let Raymond stay free. Don't let him keep destroying other families the way he destroyed yours." Isabel stood still, eyes lowered to the floor. She thought of her parents lying motionless in a hospital, thought of the 2 years of hell she'd lived through, thought of the people who might share her fate if Raymond wasn't stopped. The silence stretched. Then finally, she lifted her head. "All right, I'll help." Sebastian seemed to breathe again, but Isabel wasn't finished. "But not for you, for my parents, for what they suffered, for the justice they deserve." Sebastian nodded. "That's all I need." The meeting continued with a detailed plan. Step 1. Gather and organize every piece of evidence of financial crimes. Step 2. Isolate Raymond in the business world by pulling investments and reaching out to partners. Step 3. Hand over the evidence of the murder plot to the FBI. Step 4. Hold a press conference and reveal the truth to every major New York media outlet. When the meeting ended, everyone filed out one by one. Sebastian stayed behind, watching Isabel. "The storm's coming. Are you ready?" Isabel turned back, and her gaze was cold in a way Sebastian had never seen before. No longer the gaze of the fragile girl who'd been humiliated for 2 years. It was the gaze of someone ready to take everything back. "I've been waiting 2 years for this moment." 1 week later, the storm began. Cross Empire announced it was withdrawing every investment worth hundreds of millions of dollars from Harrington Corp., offering no explanation at all. The news spread through New York's business world like wildfire. At the same time, Raymond's major partners began receiving envelopes with no return name, each one stuffed with documents detailing Harrington Corp's shadowy dealings. Money laundering, tax fraud, forged records. Every envelope was a slow-burning bomb. Within 3 days, Harrington Corp's stock plunged 40%. Investors panicked and dumped shares. Partners turned away one by one. Banks started calling in loans. The empire Raymond Harrington had built over 20 years was collapsing right in front of him. In the top-floor office at Harrington Corp., Raymond raged like a cornered animal. He smashed a desk lamp, swept everything off the desktop and onto the floor. Papers flew everywhere. A glass shattered. Blood ran from his hand where the shards had cut him, but he didn't even notice. "What's happening?" he roared, grabbing his phone and calling partner after partner. The first didn't answer. The second hung up. The third sent him straight to voicemail. No one responded. No one wanted to talk to him. "Why is everyone turning their backs on me? I'm Raymond Harrington. I'm the most powerful man in this industry." Just then, the office door opened. Raymond's private attorney stepped in, his face drained. "Sir, I've got bad news. The FBI is investigating the company's transactions. They've gathered a great deal of evidence, and there may be an arrest warrant in a few days." Raymond went rigid, the glass in his hand slipping from his fingers and crashing to the floor. "The FBI? Where did the evidence come from?" "I don't know, sir, but it looks like someone provided them with the company's entire set of transaction records from the past 2 years. Raymond sank into his chair, his face turning the color of death. He knew who was doing this: Sebastian Cross. The kid had learned the truth. At the same time, Veronica stormed into Sebastian's penthouse like a cyclone. She'd cried the whole way there, mascara smeared, hair in disarray. "Sebastian." She ran to him, dropped to her knees, and clutched at his hand. "You have to help my father. The company's about to collapse. The FBI is investigating. Please, you have to do something." Sebastian looked down at her, his eyes cold as ice. "The engagement is canceled. You and your father have nothing to do with me anymore." Veronica froze. "What did you say? You can't do that. We're supposed to get married. I love you." Sebastian let out a humorless scoff. "Love? You love my money and my power. Don't confuse love with ambition. You and your father deceived my family for 2 years. Now it's time to pay. But I didn't know anything about what my father did. I'm innocent." "Innocent?" Sebastian arched a brow. "You put the diamond necklace into Isabel's pocket to frame her for theft. You slapped her in front of hundreds of people. You humiliated her every day for 2 years. That's innocent? Veronica choked, no words coming. Sebastian motioned to security. Take her out. From now on, she's not allowed to set foot on any Cross-Empire property. 2 guards dragged Veronica away. She screamed and cursed, but no one cared. The door closed behind her, and the silence returned. Sebastian's phone buzzed. Raymond Harrington's number. Sebastian answered without a word. Sebastian, listen to me. Raymond's panicked voice rushed through. We can negotiate. I'll give you anything you want. Money, shares, real estate, whatever you want. Sebastian laughed softly, cold. Negotiate? Did you negotiate with my father before you killed him? Did you negotiate with the Whitmores before you put them in a coma? Sebastian, I'm begging you. Wait for it, Harrington. Sebastian cut him off, his voice ice. Hell's only just beginning. He ended the call, giving Raymond no chance to say another word. Turning to Tristan beside him, Sebastian gave the order. Send invitations to every major news outlet. Press conference tomorrow, 10 o'clock in the morning, in the Cross Tower lobby. The truth about the betrayal from 2 years ago will be revealed. The next morning, the Cross Tower lobby was packed shoulder to shoulder with reporters from every major and minor outlet in New York and across the country. Hundreds of cameras aimed at the podium, flashbulbs firing without pause. News of Cross-Empire's sudden press conference had ripped through the media world overnight. Everyone wanted to know what Sebastian Cross was about to reveal. Raymond and Veronica were there too, buried in the crowd, forcing calm onto their faces, unable to hide the panic in their eyes. Raymond had come with a team of attorneys, ready to challenge anything, Sebastian said. He still believed he could control the situation. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door behind the podium opened. Sebastian Cross stepped out in a black suit, his expression cold and unreadable. But what made the crowd erupt into whispers wasn't him. It was the woman walking beside him, Isabel Whitmore. Isn't that the maid? A reporter murmured to a colleague. Why is she standing next to Sebastian Cross? Sebastian took the podium, adjusted the microphone, and began. Thank you all for coming today. I called this press conference to reveal a truth that's been hidden for 2 years. He paused, scanning the crowd. 2 years ago, my father, Richard Cross, died of a heart attack after discovering that the Cross Empire had been betrayed. Our confidential information was sold to a competitor, causing losses of hundreds of millions of dollars. All of us believed the traitor was Edward Whitmore, my father's closest friend for 30 years. Sebastian looked straight into the cameras. We were wrong. The room stirred. Raymond gripped the arm of his chair, his face draining. After a thorough investigation, we've identified the real traitor. Sebastian signaled, and the massive screen behind the podium lit up. Financial transactions appeared, with IP address data clearly tied to Harrington Corp. Next came an audio recording of Raymond discussing his plan with an accomplice, followed by an expert report describing deliberate sabotage in the car crash. Raymond Harrington is the true traitor, Sebastian declared, his voice cold as ice. He sold Cross Empire's information for $50 million. He forged evidence to frame Edward Whitmore, and when the Whitmores were about to uncover the truth, he arranged a car crash to silence them. The press corps exploded. Whispers, frantic typing, and the relentless pop of camera flashes filled the air. Raymond shot to his feet, his face turning a furious purple red. This is slander, he shouted, shoving through the crowd toward the podium. I'll sue all of you. This evidence is fabricated. Sebastian Cross is taking personal revenge because I broke off his engagement. The room buzzed louder as cameras swung toward Raymond. This was exactly what the reporters wanted. Live drama. Sebastian didn't flinch. If Mr. Harrington believes the evidence is fabricated, he can explain that to the FBI. They already have the full record. Raymond froze, mouth open, no words coming. Then Isabel stepped up to the microphone. She stood there, thin and small in the vast lobby, yet her eyes held a fierce strength. My name is Isabel Whitmore, she said, her voice trembling slightly but clear. I'm the daughter of Edward and Helen Whitmore. She took a breath. For the past 2 years, I've been called the traitor's daughter. I've been humiliated, struck, treated like a slave. I was forced to serve as a maid in the very house of the man I once loved, to atone for a crime my parents never committed. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she didn't stop. My parents have been in a coma in a hospital for 2 years because of a crash Raymond Harrington arranged. They can't defend themselves. They can't speak for themselves. So today, I'm standing here to speak for them. She looked straight into the cameras, her voice ringing with steady conviction. "My family is innocent. My father is an honest man with honor. He would never betray his friends. The real traitor is standing in this room." She turned and fixed her gaze on Raymond, fury blazing. "And he will pay for what he's done." The lobby fell silent. No one spoke. The strength in the voice of this thin young woman left everyone stunned. Then, suddenly, the great doors of the lobby swung open with a loud crash. A group of men in black suits walked in, led by a man holding an FBI badge. Raymond's face went the color of death when he saw them. He knew it. The real hell had arrived. The lead FBI agent strode into the lobby with a hard, unsmiling face, a team of federal officers following close behind. He went straight to where Raymond stood, frozen in place, and held up his badge. "Raymond Harrington, you're under arrest for financial fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Two officers stepped in, turned Raymond around, and cuffed his hands behind his back. The cold click of metal locking shut rang through the hush of the crowd. Raymond struggled, his face turning a deep, furious red with panic. "You can't do this. I'm Raymond Harrington. I'm the most powerful man in this city. You'll pay for this." But no one cared about his shouting. Cameras flashed like lightning, capturing every second of the Harrington Corp titan being handcuffed like an ordinary criminal. It would lead every newspaper and every television broadcast before the day was over. Veronica stood motionless as she watched her father being taken away. Then, as if jolted awake, she rushed to Sebastian, fell to her knees, and clutched his hand. "Sebastian, I'm sorry. Please, I'm begging you. My father forced me. I didn't have a choice." Sebastian looked down at her with an icy stare. "You framed Isabel for stealing a diamond necklace. You slapped her in front of hundreds of people. You humiliated her every day for 2 years. Did your father force you to do those things too?" Veronica sobbed, mascara smeared across her face. "You don't understand. He's all I have." She lifted her head, eyes bloodshot. "My mother abandoned me when I was 5. She said I was a burden, and then she disappeared. My father adopted me and gave me everything, but he said if I didn't obey, he'd abandon me too, the way my mother did." Her voice broke. "I was terrified of being left behind. I was terrified of being alone. So I did everything he asked. I didn't have a choice." Sebastian was silent for a long moment, looking at her kneeling at his feet. For an instant, something in his eyes seemed to soften. Then he shook his head. "Everyone has a choice, Veronica. You could have chosen not to hurt innocent people. You could have chosen to stand with what's right, but you chose wrong." He turned away. "Take her out." A female officer stepped forward, helped Veronica to her feet, and led her out for questioning. Veronica's sobs echoed through the lobby, then faded behind the closing doors. Isabel stood watching Raymond in handcuffs, her chest full of tangled feeling. 2 years. 2 years of hell. And the man standing in front of her was the reason for all of it. As if pulled by an unseen force, she walked up to Raymond. He stared at her with fear in his eyes. "You destroyed my family," Isabel said, her voice cold. "You turned my mother into a living corpse. You pushed me into 2 years of hell. You made the man I loved turn against me." Raymond trembled, trying to step back, but the officers held him tight. "Isabel, spare me. I'll make it up to you. I'll give you anything you want. Money, any amount. Please spare me." Isabel didn't answer. Her gaze slid to the press table nearby, where a letter opener lay among a scatter of documents. Her hand snatched it up so fast no one had time to react. She moved toward Raymond, the blade in her hand, eyes red with hate. "Make it up to me. Can you give me back my 2 years? Can you wake my parents up? Can you erase every night I cried alone and wanted to die just to make it stop?" She lifted the blade. The crowd screamed. The officers hadn't moved in time, but a hand caught her wrist from behind. "Belle, stop." Sebastian's voice sounded at her ear, low and steady, unyielding. "Don't do this. Don't become him. Don't let him destroy you one more time." Isabel went still, her hand shaking around the blade. She looked down at the shining edge in her grip, then at Raymond shrinking back in terror. She'd almost become the thing she hated most. She'd almost let hatred turn her into a monster. The letter opener slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a sharp clang. Isabel stood there for a moment. Then without a word, she turned and walked away. She moved through the stunned crowd, past hundreds of cameras trained on her, and stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing her off from the world outside. And alone in that tight space, Isabel collapsed onto the floor. She cried. She cried the way she'd never been allowed to cry. Justice had come. Raymond would pay, but the wound inside her was still there, still aching as sharply as it had on the very first day. 3 months later, everything had changed. Isabel sat beside the hospital bed, in the quiet room of a private clinic, morning sunlight pouring through the window and laying a warm, golden wash across the space. She held her parents' hands as they lay there, her fingers woven through theirs as if she feared that if she let go, she'd lose them all over again. "Mom, Dad, I've got good news," she whispered, her voice tight with tears. Raymond Harrington was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. He's going to pay for every crime he committed. She paused and wiped her cheeks. "Your names have been completely cleared. Everyone knows you're innocent. Whitmore Holdings is being restored. Everything will return to the way it used to be." Her voice trembled. "I only wish you could hear this. I wish you could open your eyes and see me. I miss you so much." Soft footsteps sounded behind her. Isabel turned and saw Sebastian standing in the doorway, a bouquet of white roses in his hand. He looked different from 3 months earlier. The ruthless coldness was gone, replaced by exhaustion and remorse. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice quiet. Isabel nodded. Sebastian stepped inside and set the roses on the table beside the bed. He stood there for a moment, not knowing what to say. Over the past 3 months, he'd done everything he could in silence. He'd covered every medical expense for her parents and brought in the best doctors in the world to care for them. He'd used every resource of the Cross Empire to restore Whitmore Holdings and return the company to its rightful place. But he hadn't dared to see her. He wanted to give her space to heal, so she wouldn't have to look at the face of the man who'd caused her so much suffering. "Isabel," he said at last, his voice rough. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm not here to ask you to come back to me. I just want you to know that." He stopped, swallowing hard. "I'll spend my whole life making amends for what I did to you. Whether you forgive me or not, I'm going to do it, because it's what I owe you." Isabel was silent for a long time, looking out the window where the sun was pouring in. Tears slid quietly down her cheeks. "I don't know if I can forgive completely," she said, her voice light as breath. 2 years of hell can't be erased in just a few months." She turned back to him, her deep brown eyes steady. "But I'm willing to try, to start again from the beginning, as 2 strangers, not from old wounds." Sebastian felt as if a stone that had been crushing his chest for months had finally been lifted away. He stepped closer, knelt beside her, and took her hand. For the first time in 2 years, it was a gentle handhold, not something used to drag her or force her into anything. Just a handhold. "Thank you, Belle," he said, his voice breaking. "I promise I won't fail you again. I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." In that moment, a miracle happened. Edward Whitmore's hand on the bed twitched. Isabel went rigid and looked down at her father's fingers. "Dad," she whispered, barely daring to trust her eyes. Edward Whitmore's eyes slowly opened. He blinked a few times, as if trying to adjust to the light. Then he saw his daughter. His lips moved, and his voice came out weak but clear. "Belle, my daughter," Isabel cried out, the sound bursting loose with joy and tears. "Doctor, my father's awake. My father's awake." She threw her arms around him and sobbed against his shoulder. 2 years of waiting, 2 years of suffering, 2 years of praying every night. At last, her father was back. Sebastian stood beside them, watching with wet eyes. For the first time in 2 years, a real smile lifted his mouth. Not a cold smile, not a mocking one. The smile of a man who'd found himself again. Doctors and nurses rushed in, the room filling with the sounds of machines and urgent voices. But in the middle of that chaos, Isabel and Sebastian looked at each other. Their eyes met, and in that moment, all the suffering of the past felt as if it had been gathered up, not to be forgotten, but to be laid to rest so they could keep moving forward. Morning sunlight streamed through the window, wrapping the room in gentle warmth. After a long darkness, dawn had finally come. Isabel and Sebastian's story shows us that in life, sometimes we can be deceived, misunderstood, and forced to endure injustices we never deserved. But the truth will always find its way into the light. What matters is not letting hatred turn us into the kind of people we despise. Hold on to a compassionate heart, because that's what carries us through the dark. And forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means giving yourself a chance to heal. If you feel this story touched your heart, please hit the subscribe button on our channel, like, and share the video so more people can listen. We want to know how this story made you feel. Have you ever lived through a painful misunderstanding in your own life? What do you think about forgiveness? Share your feelings in the comments below. We truly want to hear what's in your heart. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace each day. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.